thyself is to love thyself, is to examine, observe, and respect thyself. It's an ongoing process, never to be explained in a brief synopsis. It's a preoccupation with reflection and revelation that can only be achieved through discipline and determination.
Hello and welcome to the Encouraging Word Show. I'm Jamila, Freelain, your host. Now, if you haven't seen the show before, let me tell you, I've got some exciting news for you. Today, we're going to focus on something that's a real serious problem. And that particular topic and problem that we're going to focus on is student loan debt. But don't you worry. Today, not only are we going to address the need for creating greater awareness for that particular topic, but we're also going to talk about some realistic and practical solutions as well. So you'll walk away from the show not only aware of the depth and the impact of the problem, but you'll also have some practical solutions to help solve that problem. Now, if you're not familiar with the show, let me tell you a little bit of background. Now, this is actually the book that sparked everything. This is a book that I wrote about a year ago, and it's called Free Money for College. And the whole purpose behind this book was something that was birthed in me years ago when I would see students and parents over and over making some of the same mistakes when it came to lack of college preparation, lack of financial planning, lack of adequately academically preparing for school, and that sort of thing. So what I packed the book with is tips, resources, organizations, all kinds of different things, and just insights overall so that people could be more prepared for school, whether they were parents, whether they were students, or whether they were maybe adults returning back to school to retool and retrain and that sort of thing for career changes. Whatever the situation, I want people to be more prepared, and I also want to reduce the impact of college costs. College, again, is supposed to be a come up, not a financial setback. So with that in mind, that's what sparked this book. Now, as I mentioned, I want to speak about student loan debt, but just to put things in perspective, first and foremost, let's talk about the various types of debt. Of course, we know there's all sorts of debt. There is, of course, there's medical debt, there's home loans, there's credit card debt, there's all these different types of debts. And we know the impact and implications for having those kinds of debt. Oftentimes they cause marital strife. They cause people to not be able to maybe buy the car or the home they want because they can't get out from under whatever other debt that they have, and as a result it puts them in a bind. Well, not sure if you're aware of this, but next to mortgage loan debt, which is the first and foremost highest consumer debt, student loan debt is actually number 2. So again, student loan debt actually supersedes credit card debt, medical debt, auto loans, all of that. And that's unbelievable. I remember when I first heard that a few years ago, I was like shocked. But then as I really kind of examined the approach that people were using to go to school, it wasn't a surprise. But the thing that really hurt my heart is to see that people were doing it over and over, and not just were they doing it over and over in terms of going into debt, but they were going into more debt. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but for at least the last 5 years, at the very least the last 5 years or so, every graduating class in America has owed more student debt than the class before them. So what I mean is, for those that were coming out of traditional four-year schools, let's say in 2014, by 2015, the students that owed debt in 2014, the class of 2015, collectively across the nation exceeded that. Those in the class of 2016 exceeded those in the level of debt that the ones in 2015 made. And we are always about making history. That's a wonderful thing, but who wants to make it that way? Historically, college student loan debt, or actually tuition period, has increased. And so again, what I'm going to talk about today is not just how much of an impact it is, but also some solutions and some of the reasons behind that, so that way you can be more prepared as you're making your journey or taking a path towards going to school, if that is, of course, what your heart desires. So talking again about student loan debt, 1.48 trillion is what the national student loan debt amount is. Now, I always say that number to students and parents when I am working on the college cost workshop that I do for different organizations and youth groups and that sort of thing. And while that sounds like a lot, well, and that's because it is, at the end of the day, people don't really have a concept of how much that is. So years ago, I tried to get something that could give me a better example so that I could paint a picture for students and parents that I was speaking to. And I came up with an example that I found on the internet. And just to kind of picture, if you could think of, let's say, 1 trillion, and think of it in seconds, and of course we all know that it takes 60 seconds to make up a minute, right? Well, if you take a second, and if you can equate a second to and put it in perspective into trillions, 1 trillion seconds is actually equivalent to just over 31,000 years, almost 32,000 years. So if you think about 1.48 trillion, 1.48 trillion is what the national student loan debt amount is. If you think about 1 trillion is equated to, in seconds, over 31,000 years, just imagine how much it is for 1.48 trillion. It's unbelievable. It's unimaginable. It's staggering, actually, when you put it in those particular terms. And if you're looking at the screen in front of you, you actually see there's like 12 zeros behind that. So again, it's a serious issue. When it comes to the average borrower that's coming out of school, that's graduating with their 4-year degree, typically owes right around $38,000 or so. Now, is that a staggering amount on its face? No, not necessarily. But again, it precludes or prevents you from maybe being able to do some of the very things that you went to school in order to do. So if you were planning on buying a house right away, right after you finish school, if you've got $30,000 worth of debt in front of you, chances are that kind of puts the brakes on that sort of thing. If you were looking at starting a family and you were trying to do it in that way, where you take in consideration your income and your spouse's income or that sort of thing, that kind of pumps the brakes on that. If you're looking at maybe starting a business, and that's something that I love about a lot of the millennials now, they've got this entrepreneurship bug, and so many of them want to start their own businesses, but my goodness, with all the debt that they've incurred, a lot of times they're prevented from doing that. So that has, again, a lot of implications when you look at that level of debt. Well, we've talked a lot about student loan debt. So now I want to talk about some of the reasons behind that. And of course, the reason we want to do that is because if you know the reasons, if you know ahead of time, then you can kind of circumvent that and kind of work around that ahead of time, especially if you're watching this and you're in like middle school or something like that, or if you're a parent of a middle schooler. Again, it makes all the difference in the world if you start early. So let's talk about then some of the reasons for this. Well, as I've mentioned in previous shows, not sure if you're aware of this, but of course we all know that it takes 4 years to complete a bachelor's degree if you're typically on track. But on average right now, the average person is taking about 6 years to complete their bachelor's degree. So that's one of the reasons we've kind of dragged things out. And sometimes it's because of things being unforeseeable. Life does happen. With that being said, too, there's also the trend of a lot of non-traditional students going back to school. So, for example, an adult that may have started right out of high school, took a break, got married, had kids, what have you, and then decided to return back to school. Well, they can't always take a full course load if they're working full time, that sort of thing. So those sorts of things contribute as well. But by and large, that's one of the primary reasons, is because now the average length of time that it takes to complete a bachelor's degree is about 6 years. So that's reason number one. The second reason that so many students oftentimes, or that there's a lot with student loan debt, is because students oftentimes will change majors. And when students change majors, of course, that can really back things up. Oftentimes, if you change majors, that may mean you have to repeat some classes or go back and make up some courses that you didn't complete. It can oftentimes push you back maybe a semester or a whole nother year or 2 years, depending on how many times you switch majors. That can just continuously delay you, which also, each time you think about it, that's money you're paying each time, additional money that you're paying each time that you do that. So you want to be mindful of that again and have a good game plan in place before you even go off to school. If you start doing a lot of career exploration early on, you can really make a very strong, educated decision in terms of picking your major when you go to college. And that's not to say that you won't change majors, but the likelihood of that decreases, and you save yourself some time and money. After all, you want to hit the ground running, and you want to be able to begin to earn money. That's the whole purpose typically of you going to school in the first place. Can I get an amen? So at the end of the day, reason number 2 is typically because people change majors so often, and so many times that is the case. Reason number 3 is that when it comes down to it, tuition, especially for like the past 15, 20 years, just there's always been a steady increase with tuition costs. Well, actually, over about that 15, 20-year period as well, tuition has really begun in outpacing inflation. Inflation typically is going to be right around 1 to 3%, and we oftentimes know that, if you're working a full-time job, you maybe get a cost of living increase just to kind of keep up with inflation, that sort of thing. But with tuition costs for that same period of time, tuition costs have actually increased on average about 5%. So if you think about inflation being maybe 1 to 3% and our incomes only incrementally going up by that amount, but tuition may be increasing by this amount, by 5, then automatically it becomes even much more cost prohibitive as time has gone on. So those are some of the reasons, some of the primary reasons. Of course, there's a multitude of different reasons that student loan debt is where it is right now, but those are some of the primary reasons. Now, we're going to go to a commercial in about 3-4 minutes, so I really want to wrap up and get to some solutions before we get back to the break. Before the break, what we're going to talk about is pre-college solutions. So in order to really avoid some of that student loan debt, some of the things that you could do to really kind of prevent being in that particular circumstance of excessive student loan debt is, number 1 is, as I've mentioned before, early career exploration is key. If you have a mentor that is in maybe a field or an industry that you're thinking of going into, why not do a job shadowing day? Why not spend a day in the life? Why not maybe even sit down and interview them just as if you were doing it for a class to find out really what that particular job maybe consists of? If you're, let's say, for example, taking time off during the summer and you typically sit home, maybe if you save up during the school year, maybe you'll be able to save money for some type of summer program. And there's so many different summer programs that are out there now. There's summer programs that highlight careers in engineering. There's some careers that highlight areas like aviation. If you've watched some of the past broadcasts, I had a lady on by the name of Brenda Robinson. She was the first African-American female naval pilot, and she actually has a summer program right here in the Charlotte area that focuses on or highlights aviation. There's some career paths or career-related summer camps that focus on broadcasting and things like that. Those can be a tremendous gift to you because they give you insight about that particular major. And even if you're spending on the high end for a summer camp, maybe let's say $200 or up to maybe even $1,000. If you're spending $1,000 for a summer program and you found out you didn't like it, that's still a heck of a lot less than if you spend a whole semester away at college and find out that you didn't like it. It makes a world of difference. Another thing that you can do, and this is pretty popular, it got to be really kind of a sexy sounding thing after Malia Obama decided to take a gap year, but that term has been around for the last few years. It's kind of popular now. A gap year is basically where you don't maybe go to school right after graduating from high school. You take maybe a year off to kind of let your brain rest and kind of marinate, but you have to make that time productive, because if you get out of the habit with school and get out of a routine, sometimes it's real hard to get back. It's almost like if you're trying to lose weight and you just get out of the habit of going to the gym, that sort of thing, you kind of get out of sync and you get comfortable just sitting on the couch watching whatever your favorite show is and eating potato chips, whatever. But a gap year can be really, really productive and can really help you to get in tune with what you're interested in, especially if you're working maybe in something that's related to the major you're thinking of going into, or if you're maybe doing some community service that's related to that. Gap year can definitely help to put you on the right track. Last thing I want to touch on before we go to commercial, because we have about 30 seconds left, and that is thinking of a community college or a junior college. The cost typically is less per credit hour than it is if you were going away to a traditional college or a traditional university right after high school. And typically, especially if you're doing your general education classes, the math, the science, the English, those kinds of classes, a lot of times if you check out things on the front end and find out if those classes are going to transfer to that 4-year college or university that you're thinking of going to, you literally can save yourself thousands of dollars just by using that technique as well. Now, when we come back, I'm going to talk about some solutions for those who actually have graduated from college as well. And then we're going to be joined by a credit repair expert who I think has a lot of great knowledge to share. I was going to say don't turn the channel, but stay tuned, I guess is what I really mean to say. Thanks for watching. And we're back. Now, for those of you that are joining us this second half of the show that may not have seen the first half, let me tell you, you missed some valuable information, so I want you to be able to go back and check that out. Of course, you can look at the Facebook Live or you can look at the broadcast on this Thursday. Now, I have actually with me today my good friend Charles Hopgood, who is a credit repair specialist, and he is the man, let me tell you. Now, of course, the whole purpose of talking about this particular topic today is because we want people to get real clear on how they can empower themselves. Now, during the first half of the show, we talked about student loan debt, and we talked about solutions if you are going into college as a high school student or a recent high school graduate, and how you can actually prevent some of the same pitfalls and avoid some of the same pitfalls that people oftentimes find themselves trying to navigate through as far as trying to not get into student loan debt. Now, I want to talk now, though, to the adults or to those that are returning to college maybe after some time and talk about some solutions there. And, of course, Charles, because you're my guest, I want you to be able to chime in as well. And then, of course, he has some valuable information at the end as well, talking about credit repair. So we're going to jump right in. In terms of talking about solutions for those adults that are looking to get rid of student loan debt or looking at reducing their repayment time on those, is one thing that you can look at is doing loan consolidation. Now, loan consolidation, let's say you've got 5-10 different student loans from here, there, and everywhere, and you got to pay Peter, Paul, John, Mary, Sue, Jane, whoever. Well, in order to really kind of keep yourself from losing your mind and reducing anxiety, one of the things that you can do is to bring all of those loans together. That's what we call consolidation. And it's a lot easier in terms of making timely payments and in terms of keeping track of things with your budget. If you just have to make one payment to one entity, one institution, as opposed to 10, that's one aspect or one avenue that you can look at. Did you want to speak to that maybe for a second, Charles?
Well, that was awesome. The way that you laid that out, that's perfect.
Well, thanks.
Seeing that I had to go back to school as an adult, and I'm running a full-time business, and I was doing a lot of philanthropic work in my fraternity. That's a great subject. If you are a person that is trying to consider going back to school to further your education, most employers would have a bill with you. And there's also a program out there that if you're doing something as far as a government employee, they will forgive the student loan.
Yes, that's actually the second thing I was going to talk about. So, yeah, speak on it. Yeah, if you're...
And so then, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, no. If you're, a civil servant, let's say, for example, if you're an officer, if you're a teacher, maybe in a certain area, or if you're like a social worker. Yeah. Absolutely. So whatever you may have borrowed, a lot of times that can be forgiven, or sometimes they'll have stipulation up where maybe you have to repay on it for 10 years and you have to be in good standing with those payments and be consistent with those payments, but whatever the remainder or the balances of those loans can be forgiven. So they're set up in different ways, but you're absolutely right. That's an awesome one. A third one I want to speak to, and I definitely want you to chime in on this as well, Charles, is refinancing. Let's say you've had a good credit history maybe up till now, and then these student loans hit, and Lord, but maybe you own a home and you are able to take out another loan, like a personal loan or an equity loan, and because interest rates are still reasonable, maybe your interest rate is lower on that equity loan or that personal loan. So if you were paying 6 or 7 or 4% interest on your student loans over here, just by virtue of you switching those loans for a lower interest rate, you literally can save yourself thousands of dollars. And how would that be a benefit to someone, Charles?
And you're hitting some excellent topics. I'm just,
well, thank you.
This is great. I really get excited when I hear someone so just versed and educated about this. But
well,
one way, the things that you can do with this is, she's absolutely right. But most people who aren't homeowners, there's two parts to this. If you're a homeowner, you can absolutely take out what's called a HELOC, which is against your home. You don't have to have the greatest of credit.
And you said you call that, what is it, a HELOC? Okay.
You probably aren't making a lot of money. So you can call and do an offer to compromise, just like you would do with the IRS, and they will forgive part of the student loan.
Wow.
If you're going to pay some down, and they'll let you pay for a certain amount of time. You're not physically able to pay. So it can be two sides to that.
Okay.
But you're absolutely right.
Okay.
You do have options. You don't have to have the greatest of credit.
Okay.
If you have a home, but if you do have challenged credit, there are certain things that you can do to put yourself in a position to get back in a repayment deal. They have a program that they'll have you repay a small payment for 9 months. Now, most people say, well, heck, I just got my taxes. I can take 9 months of those payments and give it to you at once.
Yeah.
They absolutely won't pay that. What they are wanting you to do is become responsible and to see the consistency of your payments.
Okay.
And then after the 9 months, they'll make the loan, they'll bring it up to date. And then you can go on with your life and further your family's betterment. But if you're in a situation where you can't afford the loan as it is, you can do something and offer to compromise the rest of it.
Wow, that's tremendous. And I don't think most people know that. And I mean, I consider myself to be pretty knowledgeable about that topic, but I think that's just invaluable.
Yeah, they'll forgive it. But there's a catch to that, too.
Okay.
If they do forgive that loan, you will get a 1099 for that balance that you'll have to claim on your taxes.
Okay.
I've actually helped 5 people do that.
Wow. And what is the then? When we improve our credit, what are some of the outcomes of that? What is one of the biggest benefits, or what are some of the benefits of having A+ credit, or just good credit even? What would be the motivation for that?
Awesome question. Lower insurance rates, better job opportunities, lower no deposit on utilities, better banking privileges, lower interest rates on your home loan, lower interest rates on your automotive loans, the ability to be able to not repeat the cycle that you fell into with your children, and starting them off in the right path of good credit. It's so many. A lot of people just think having good credit is to go buy something.
Right.
A classic example. I have a client that makes about $22,000 a year now. In today's society, that's not a lot of money.
Right.
But she owns her home, and her lowest credit score is an 815.
Wow, she is doing it.
She went through my program 4 years ago, and she is stuck to it. So she's like, Charles, I don't want to go get any credit. I said, you have to have a certain amount of revolving.
Right.
You don't have to necessarily use it. Doesn't mean you use it. You just have to have it. Being a single woman, you need to have that security. So credit is really more. It's almost biblical. That's what the Bible was started on, with somebody's word. So it's almost biblical. If you can just follow it, it's such an easy process. I think you and I were talking the other day about losing your job. What would that do to your credit?
Yeah.
You can absolutely, before I don't want to go too deep into it because I'm sharing some nuggets and I hope I'm not being too bold.
No. That's what I wanted, the interaction.
It's a complete godsend. You guys have been on the phone hours and hours at a time, and she's spent countless hours trying to figure out what's going to be best for her listeners. And I was so enthralled by her passion to help people that I told myself I was going to dedicate whatever she needed to do to bring to Charlotte. So this is an awesome opportunity, you guys. You have an angel on this podcast.
Aww.
Just no idea.
Thank you.
But there's so many things that we're going to put out there. But that's one of the things you can do. You can go get a loan against your home, and or do an offer to. They'll forgive them on forgiveness. You might even qualify for forgiveness. A lot of the companies will tell you don't qualify, and the reason being is because the more that they get from the consumer, they get to keep some of that money, those companies. If you're persistent and you have proof that you qualify for forgiveness, you absolutely will get it.
And I've heard that too. Even if you're eligible, sometimes they make you jump through so many hoops, I've heard, in order to just,
absolutely.
Yeah. But I guess it makes sense. I mean, if they got to forgive $30,000, $50,000, $100,000, they're not going to make it easy for you. So, okay, that stands to reason. And you spoke to something else too, employer contributions. And if you guys go to my Facebook page tomorrow, I'll have it posted. This is an article I just started really kind of hearing about that maybe just let's say three years ago or so, about employers who of course we all know what tuition reimbursement is, and you go to school and your employer will pay for some of your schooling while you're employed with them. But there are some employers now who are, again, kind of ahead of the game and ahead of the curve, so to speak. And what they're doing as a result of noticing that this is a really serious national problem is many of them are actually offering employer contributions to whatever your student loan debt is. And some of those companies, we're naming names on this on this article, but I want you to be aware of that. So then in the case of maybe your employability, if you happen to be just getting out of school, or again just graduating, whether you're an adult student or a student who was a recent high school graduate and went straight through, if you're looking at some of these different companies, this can really help you tremendously too in terms of offsetting some of those costs that you may have incurred while you were in school. Also, something else I want to speak to, again, and this is something I've spoke to a little bit in some previous shows, and we'll kind of go, actually this is something I'll do with Charles, is talking about the difference between federal student loans versus private student loans, because there are some clear distinctions, and you need to be very wise in knowing these. But with the federal student loans, they usually are much more flexible in terms of the repayment options. There's usually about 8 or so options. I'm not going to go into all of those right now, just in the interest of time, but just know that some of them can be graduated. So as you begin to earn more money, then your payments go up. Some of them can be stretched out. There's like a 25-year plan. So if, for example, you extended it for 25 years, that can lower whatever your monthly payment is typically. And I think that has to be over a certain dollar amount. But depending on what your loan, your amount is, that could work out very well for you. And again, just kind of free you up in terms of having spending cash on hand, for your day-to-day expenses, and maybe using some of that money, that additional money that you would have otherwise had to pay on your student loan, to invest that money and maybe be able to make some money, some additional money, so you can get that loan paid off sooner. So income-based, of course, we talked about just briefly, pay as you earn. So those are some of the different options. One other thing is, for example, those that are maybe going into something like law enforcement or areas like that. Oftentimes the military is a great place to look. Not only is the military a great place to look if you're just getting out of high school and you want to make a career path for yourself, but oftentimes if you've completed a degree, there are sometimes military programs where they can help you to reduce your student debt as well. Let's get Charles. Did you want to chime in on some of those things too, maybe?
Absolutely. I actually, excuse me, you guys, I'm a little the jerking around.
That's okay. You know what? You're being consistent, because we've had some tech difficulties tonight, so it's been an adventure. No worries. You fall right in line. That's fine.
So, yes, I was in the military, and they actually paid some of my student loans when I re-enlisted. So
wow.
That's absolutely an option for you. So I can agree with that. And the other part about that is, the other part that you said, most employers will do a forgiveness, and they'll do a signing bonus to pay your student loans.
Is that for certain industries though, or do you find that across the board?
Anything in the tech. I know tech and medical are doing that.
Okay.
And what we're dealing with right now, we're dealing with a large number of student loan debt.
Yeah.
And the government's trying to come up with something, but you actually know it's going to take them a while.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
The quick fix as well, that would be to get your financial house in order, get your credit restored, and try to do the deferment. Either do a deferment or do the forgiveness, or do the refinance. You don't have to have a high score to refinance. You just need to be kind of credit clean. Credit needs to be kind of in a good place. And credit unions, there's some credit unions all across the United States that will do a refinance with you.
Oh, wow.
Very considerable lower rates that will help you out.
Yeah, I think that's valuable to mention because just a few years ago they just started doing that. For a long time they didn't allow you to refinance on student loan debt. So yeah, that's something I appreciate you bringing up again.
What I'm going to do though, because again I told you guys have, you can't see her wings. They're tucked in and they're tucked in the nice outfit she has on. You can't see them. So I'm going to give a love offering. She's going to pick someone who's an adult student trying to go back to school but having issues with their credit and their student loans. She's going to pick someone. I'm going to do them a credit makeover free of charge. We're only going to be responsible for the lines of the monitoring accounts so we can keep track of that. So Jay's going to pick somebody. We're going to take care of you, and we're just going to give you a love offering. We know it's hard out here.
Yeah, it is.
And as African Americans, we need to try to look out for one another, and we have resources. That's why God calls it favor. He's doing a favor in your life, so you're supposed to reciprocate that favor amongst other people.
Right.
So in order for you to flourish and grow like you've done in your life, in your career, you've given favor to someone. You've given money to someone that's homeless. I know you are. I can see your spirit. So this is what we're doing here. So I want to extend that love offering, and I'm going to allow you to pick whoever.
Okay.
To make it happen.
Okay, and I will inbox that person. Now, we actually are running short on time, and I can't thank you enough, Charles, for joining us today. Two quick things. I want you to repeat your name again. It's Charles Hopgood, and where can people find you? How can they get in touch with you?
Yes, my name is Charles Hopgood, Charles L. Hopgood. You can find me on Facebook under my name, Charles L. Hopgood II. Or you can go and like my business page, which is Infinity Financial Consultants, LLC. Or you can find me on Instagram at hotgoody_06. You'll always be able to see, I promise you, at least 6 out of 7 days a week, you'll get something positive that will help you with your life and finances.
And I can attest to that.
Thank you so much. I humbly thank you so much for having me on your show. And God bless.
Thank you again, and I'll follow up with you. Thank you all for watching. I appreciate it. Again, we talked a lot about student loans and student loan debt and some real and practical solutions, whether you're beginning to start college, or if you've graduated from college and now have some loan debt, and some practical ways in which you can alleviate that debt. Thank you so much for watching, and I want to end with a quick quote. And this is just a real quick quote that I found the other day. It says, "Consult not your fears, but your hopes and your dreams. Think not about what your frustrations are, but about your unfulfilled potential. Concern yourself not with what you've tried and failed at, but with what is still possible for you to do." And that's a quote by John Paul the 23rd. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.